Christmas. The family gathered together, golden lights flickering in the trees, the aroma of cinnamon in the air, laughter echoing through the room. And then, in the midst of all this joy, a mother looks at her son and declares with cutting coldness, "You won't get anything." Why would any mother do this? Why, on the most sacred day of the year, would she humiliate her own son in front of the entire family? This is Michael's story, a 32-year-old man who spent decades invisible in his own mother's eyes, who received crumbs where his brother received feasts, who was judged, despised, rejected. But 3 years after that humiliating Christmas, he returned. Not as the pleading son she knew, but as someone who finally discovered his own worth. And the gift he brought exposed the true nature of her greed for the entire family to see. This story will challenge everything you think about maternal love, family favoritism, and the price of self-dignity. It all began 3 weeks before Christmas. Michael stood in his small apartment, watching snow fall gently over the city beyond his window. He worked as a math teacher at a public school. The pay wasn't much. In fact, he struggled to cover rent by month's end. But there was one thing he always did, without fail, every year: buy Christmas gifts for his family. Michael held the envelope in his hands. Inside was something that had taken him months to create. It wasn't expensive in monetary terms, but it was worth far more than any gold watch or sparkling jewel. It was a letter, a handwritten letter, where he shared childhood memories, moments when his mother had helped him, and words of deep gratitude. Along with the letter was an old photograph he'd had digitally restored, an image of Michael as a child, smiling beside his mother in the park, decades ago. He had spent hours on it. Every word was chosen with care. Each sentence, a piece of his heart. She's going to love this, Michael thought, with a shy smile on his lips. But Michael didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that his mother, Margaret, had changed. Or perhaps she had always been this way, and he simply never wanted to see the truth. Margaret was 58 years old. A widow for 5 years, she had become obsessed with status, appearances, and the opinions of others' neighbors and relatives alike. Her house was large and immaculate, decorated with expensive furniture and works of art that she made a point of displaying to every visitor. For Margaret, Christmas wasn't about family. It was about showing off. It was about who gave the most expensive gifts, the most impressive ones, the kind worthy of posting on social media. And then the day arrived, Christmas Eve. Margaret's house was full of people. Uncles, aunts, cousins, family, friends. The table overflowed with gourmet food. The Christmas trees. Yes, she had 3 gleamed with golden and silver lights. Christmas music played softly in the background. Everything seemed perfect. Michael arrived at 7 o'clock. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention. In his hands, he carried a white envelope, slightly crumpled from nervousness. Margaret greeted him with a cold kiss on the cheek. Her eyes scanned Michael from top to bottom, and for a brief second, he saw judgment in her face. But she said nothing. Not yet. The evening continued. People ate, drank, and laughed. Michael tried to join the conversations, but a tightness formed in his chest. He knew his family. He knew the unspoken judgments. He knew the pitying glances whenever someone mentioned his profession as a teacher. And then the moment came. The moment Margaret had been anxiously waiting for all year. The gift exchange. One by one, family members opened their presents. Shouts of joy echoed through the room. "Look how beautiful. Wow, that must have cost a fortune." "You shouldn't have!" Margaret beamed, nodding graciously, accepting the compliments as if they were tributes to a queen. Then it was Michael's turn. He stood, holding the envelope with both hands, his heart pounding. He approached his mother, seated in an armchair at the center of the room, surrounded by designer bags, imported perfumes, and gleaming jewels. "Mom," said Michael, his voice barely a whisper, "I prepared something special for you this year." He extended the envelope. Margaret glanced at the envelope, then at Michael, then around the room, as if checking who was watching. She took the envelope between 2 fingers, as if touching something filthy. She opened it slowly. She pulled out the letter. Her eyes scanned the first lines. And then something shifted. Her face contorted, not from emotion, not from gratitude, but from unmistakable contempt. "Is that all?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The music seemed to have stopped. The conversation ceased. All eyes turned to Michael and Margaret. Michael swallowed hard. I wrote every word from my heart, Mom. And the photo, I had it digitally restored just for—" "A letter?" Margaret interrupted, her voice dripping with indignation. "You're giving me a letter?" She hurled the envelope to the floor. The photo slipped out, landing face up on the carpet. Michael stared at it, his own childhood image, smiling innocently back at him. "Look around, Michael," Margaret continued, gesturing to the gifts surrounding her. "Look at what other people gave me. Designer bags, perfumes, jewels, things of value. And you? You bring me paper?" Michael felt the blood drain from his face. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. "I work all year long, Mom," he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "I don't have much money, but I put my heart into this." "Heart?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "Heart doesn't pay bills, Michael. Heart doesn't show respect. If you really loved me, you would have found a way to give me something worthy. Something I could show people. Not this." She kicked the envelope with her foot, sending it sliding even further away. And then came the final blow. Margaret stood up, looked Michael directly in the eyes, and with the entire room in absolute silence declared, "This year, you get nothing from me. Nothing. You embarrassed me. You disrespected me. And I won't reward that." Michael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He looked around the room. Some relatives averted their gaze, uncomfortable. Others watched with morbid curiosity, as if they were witnessing a car crash. Some even seemed to agree with Margaret, nodding their heads slightly in approval. No one stood up to defend him. No one said anything. Michael looked at the photo on the floor, at the letter he had written so carefully, at his mother, who now stared at him with cold eyes, without a hint of remorse. And then, without saying a word, he turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. He could feel everyone's eyes on his back. He could hear the whispers starting as soon as he passed. He could feel the humiliation burning in his chest like fire. He opened the door. Snow was falling outside, white and silent. The cold air hit his face, but he barely felt it. He was numb, empty. Michael closed the door behind him and stood at the entrance, looking up at the dark sky. His heart was broken, but somewhere deep in his soul, something began to stir. Something that wasn't sadness or anger. It was determination. Because Michael had a secret his mother didn't know. A secret that would change everything. He had received an inheritance 3 months ago. A considerable inheritance from a distant uncle who had died without children. Michael hadn't told anyone. He had saved that money, planning to use it to help his family if they needed it, to support his mother if she faced hardship. But now he saw everything clearly. Margaret didn't need help. She needed a lesson, and Michael was about to give her exactly that. He took a deep breath, wiped away a single tear that ran down his face. And then, with firm steps, he walked away from his mother's house, disappearing into the snowy night. What no one inside that house knew was that Michael would return. And when he did, he would bring with him a gift that would expose the true face of his mother's greed for everyone to see. The story was only beginning, and justice, silent and patient, was already on its way. He left his mother's house that Christmas afternoon with empty hands and a heavy heart. The door closed behind him with a sound that would echo in his memory for days. It wasn't a violent slam. There were no final screams. Just the soft click of a door closing, as if he had never been there. As if his presence had never mattered. The drive to his small apartment was silent. No radio, no music. Just the sound of his tires on the road as he drove through streets decorated with Christmas lights. Watching families through illuminated windows. Seeing what he never had, and now knew he would never have. The city celebrated, but for him, it was just another day his mother chose not to see him. When he got home, he didn't turn on the lights right away. He sat on the couch, in the dark, letting the reality of what had happened settle into his bones. And it was there, in that silence broken only by the distant sound of fireworks, that the memories began to arrive. Not like an organized film, but like painful fragments he had spent years trying to bury. The first memory that surfaced was from when he was 7 years old. It was his birthday, and he had saved his money from small jobs for months, washing neighbors' cars, carrying groceries, anything a child could do. He wanted to buy a gift for his mother, not because she had asked for it, but because he still believed that if he was good enough, loving enough, she would finally look at him the way she looked at his brother. He bought a mug. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a white mug with hand-painted flowers, sold by a woman at the fair. But to him, with his hard-earned money and his hopeful 7-year-old heart, it was everything. He wrapped it in newspaper because he didn't have wrapping paper, tied it with a red string he found at home, and waited for the right moment to give it to her. He remembers how his hands trembled when he extended the package to her. He remembers how she looked at it, then at the gift, and then simply set it aside without opening it. "I'll look at it later," she said, already turning her attention back to his brother, who had just arrived from school with a report card full of high marks. He waited days for her to open it. He waited weeks. The mug remained there, on the kitchen table, still wrapped in its crumpled newspaper, until one morning, it was gone. He never asked what happened to it. He already knew the answer that hurt too much to speak aloud, but that was not the only time. The memories kept coming, one after another, like waves he could not stop. There was that time when he was 10 years old, when he won a prize at school for a drawing he had made. It was nothing grand, just an honorable mention in a local competition. But the teacher had said he had talent. She had said he was special. He ran home, holding the certificate as if it were gold, eager to show his mother that he too could be a source of pride. He found her in the living room, surrounded by neighbors, serving tea and cookies. At the center of the conversation was a framed photo of his brother, who had recently graduated from university, wearing a suit and tie, smiling that confident smile that always seemed so natural to him. The women sighed and praised, and his mother glowed with a pride he had never seen directed at himself. "Mom," he had called out, shy but hopeful. "Look what I won." She turned, saw the crumpled certificate in his sweaty hands, and her smile wilted just enough for him to notice. "Very good," she said in that tone, not quite disinterested, but far from celebratory. It was tolerance. It was the bare minimum she could offer without appearing cruel in front of visitors. One of the neighbors tried to take the certificate to look at it, but his mother had already returned to the conversation about his brother, his professional prospects, his well-bred girlfriend, the bright future awaiting him. He stood there for a few more seconds, clutching his small triumph that suddenly felt insignificant, before climbing the stairs to the room he shared with boxes of things nobody wanted anymore. Years later, when he was 16, his brother bought a car. Not with his own money. Their mother had helped, had saved, had made sacrifices that she would recount to anyone willing to listen. The car was not new, but it was his, and the celebration was epic. A small breakfast was organized, relatives were invited. Photos were taken with his brother posing proudly beside his first vehicle. He remembers being there, watching the scene from a distance. He remembers thinking about how just months before, he had asked his mother for help buying textbooks for school. They weren't expensive, but he didn't have the money, and her answer had been swift and cutting. "You need to learn to manage on your own. Life doesn't give anything for free." But apparently, her life gave free cars to her favorite son. He said nothing that day. He didn't confront, complain, or cry. He simply observed, recording once more the invisible yet unmistakable hierarchy. Who mattered, and who was merely a burden to endure. And his brother, what was there to say about him? The golden child who could do everything right without even trying. He was 3 years older, and those 3 years seemed to contain all the difference between being loved and being endured. The brother had attended good schools, not because he was necessarily more intelligent, but because their mother had fought to get him in. He'd had private lessons when he needed them, while the youngest was left to figure things out alone. "You're smart, you'll manage," she would say, as if neglect could pass for confidence. When the brother graduated, he landed a job at a large company. His mother couldn't stop telling everyone. With that gleam in her eyes, he recognized too well because it was never directed at him. The brother earned well, drove a nicer car now, lived in a neighborhood that made the neighbors sigh with envy. And he, the younger son, was the silent failure she avoided mentioning in social conversations. But what hurt most was not just the preference. It was the casual cruelty with which that preference was exercised. He remembers a family dinner, years later as an adult, when he mentioned a small promotion at work. Nothing grand, just recognition of his effort. A modest raise that meant being able to pay his bills without constant strain. Before he could finish, his brother interrupted to announce he'd bought an apartment. His mother rose from the table to embrace him, tears streaming down her face, calling him her pride, her joy, the son who made it all worthwhile. Then she returned to the table, looked at him with that familiar expression and said, "You see? Your brother is an example. Maybe you should ask him for advice on how to be successful." In that moment, something inside him began to die. Not all at once, not dramatically, but like a candle gradually extinguishing, leaving only smoke and the memory that once there was light. But what his mother didn't know, what no one in that family knew, was that while he was being ignored, despised, cast aside like a defective piece on a shelf, something was growing inside him. It wasn't anger, though there was some of that. It wasn't just resilience, though he developed thick layers of it. It was something deeper, more transformative. It was the slow and painful understanding that he didn't need their validation to have worth. It was the gradual realization that being invisible to them had made him free in a way his golden brother would never be. Without the spotlight of maternal approval, he had learned to walk his own paths. Without the weight of her judgment hanging over him, he had allowed himself to experiment, fail, and try again, without the paralyzing fear of disappointing her. Because how do you disappoint someone who never expected anything from you in the first place? In recent years, things had changed in his life. Changes he kept private, achievements he felt no need to announce to an audience that would never applaud anyway. He had found his own way, had built something that was entirely his, without their help, without their approval, without needing anything from them. There was a certain power in that, a kind of freedom that comes from owing nothing to anyone. He still remembered the day he realized he had surpassed his brother financially. Not that it mattered, money was never the point. But there was a moment of satisfying irony in knowing that the failed son was doing better than the successful son. He didn't tell anyone, obviously. Why would he? To receive their skepticism? To hear how he was probably lying or exaggerating? No, his successes were his, guarded silently like seeds in fertile soil, growing far from eyes that only saw what they wanted to see. And now, sitting in the darkness of his apartment on that Christmas night, after yet another public and humiliating rejection, he found himself thinking about something he had avoided thinking about for years. Was there any part of her that could see him? Really see him? What if she knew who he had become? What he had built alone, without her help, without the favoritism she poured over his brother? Would anything change? Probably not. He knew that. Years of neglect don't disappear with revelations, no matter how dramatic. But there was a smaller, more human question that persisted. Should he go back? Days had passed since Christmas. Life continued its rhythm around him. The world didn't stop because his heart was processing decades of compressed pain in a single moment of rejection. He went to work, fulfilled his responsibilities, smiled when necessary, but part of him was stuck in that decision. Part of him wanted to simply move forward, cut the ties once and for all, accept that some people will never love us the way we need to be loved, and that maybe it's better that way. Carrying hope where there's no soil to plant it is a form of self-torture. But another part of him, that part that still carried the 7-year-old boy with his mug wrapped in newspaper, that part still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to reach her. Not to prove something, not to rub his success in her face or avenge past humiliations, but maybe to give her one last chance to see that the son she discarded had as much value as the one she idolized. Maybe even more. One night, while organizing some old documents, he found something he'd kept for years without giving it much thought. But now, in light of recent revelations about who he'd become, it took on an entirely new meaning. It could change everything. Not because it was expensive, though it held real value. Not because it was impressive, though it certainly commanded attention. But because it was undeniable. It was physical proof that the son she'd repeatedly rejected had become someone she never thought possible. He held the object in his hands, feeling its weight, both literal and symbolic. And for the first time since that humiliating Christmas, a small smile touched his lips. Maybe he would go back after all. But if he went back, it would be on his terms. Not as the pleading son seeking scraps of affection. Not as the invisible child waiting to finally be seen. But as the man he had become despite her, not because of her. And the gift he would bring wouldn't be just an object. It would be the truth. Something shifted in that icy Christmas silence. As he walked through the deserted streets, observing the colored lights in other people's windows, a strange determination began to grow inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was something deeper, more calculated. I'll go back, he thought, but not with what she expects. In the months that followed, he began to prepare. Not for a common reconciliation, not to apologize or beg for acceptance. He was building something different, something that would expose the truth everyone pretended not to see. The life he'd built away from his family wasn't accidental. While his mother spent her savings on expensive gifts for her favorite son, he invested every penny in education, opportunities, and growth. Without the family safety net, every decision carried weight, every mistake cost dearly, and every victory was entirely his own. His business started small, a shared office with 2 other struggling entrepreneurs. He worked 16-hour days, sleeping on a borrowed couch, counting every dollar. While others celebrated with expensive lunches, he ate yesterday's leftovers. While colleagues partied over small wins, he reinvested everything. And it worked. Gradually, the small business grew. Contracts transformed into partnerships, partnerships into investments, investments into a solid, respected, profitable company. He didn't need to broadcast his success online. He didn't need to flaunt imported cars or designer clothes. His was the quiet kind of success, the kind that builds empires while others build illusions. But he never forgot the empty box, never forgot the cruel laughter, never forgot the absolute coldness in those maternal eyes. At 32 years old, he was financially independent, respected in his field. Invited to speak at conferences, consulted by companies larger than he had ever imagined knowing. And yet his family knew nothing of any of this. Then the idea came, crystal clear, perfect. It wasn't about proving his worth, he had already proven that to himself. It was about exposing the hypocrisy, about revealing what truly mattered to that woman who had given him life but never truly loved him. He began to plan his return. Meanwhile, 300 kilometers away, the mother continued her routine. A routine that revealed, day after day, exactly who she was. Thursday morning, The neighbor from the apartment next door, Mrs. Henderson, knocked asking to borrow sugar. Mrs. Henderson lived alone, received a minimum pension, and always tried to maintain dignity despite her difficulties. The mother opened the door just enough to speak without inviting her in. Sugar? Oh, we're all out here too, she lied, while behind her, on the kitchen counter, a 2-kilogram package was clearly visible. Have you tried asking Carol from 302? She might have some. Mrs. Henderson thanked her, embarrassed, and left. The door closed. No remorse, no hesitation. After all, lending sugar to the poor was a waste. They never returned anything of value. But the following Friday, when the wealthy cousin came to visit, driving her imported SUV, the door flew open before she even rang the doorbell. Claire, what a joy! Come in, come in! I made that cake you love. Coffee is already brewing. The difference wasn't subtle. It was glaring, calculated. The mother treated people like assets or liabilities in a mental ledger. Those with money, status, and useful connections received wide smiles and warm hospitality. Those who had nothing to offer got half-closed doors and cold lies. And she saw no problem with it. For her, it was simply being smart, looking after her interests, not mixing with just anyone. In conversations with girlfriends, during afternoon teas soaked in gossip, she told her version of the story of her ungrateful son. Can you believe he had the nerve to give me an empty box at Christmas? Empty, after everything I did for him. I raised that boy, gave him food, clothes, shelter. And he thanks me with a humiliation like that in front of the whole family. The girlfriends shook their heads sympathetically. No one asked what had been in the box before it was empty. No one questioned whether she had treated both sons equally. No one wanted to know the complete truth. The comfortable narrative was much easier to digest. As for the favorite son, he received everything. A new apartment. The mother lent him money interest-free. A car, she put down the deposit. Problems at work, she pulled strings to get him another job. He was spoiled, protected, insulated from the consequences of his own mistakes. While the other son had learned to swim in deep waters, this one never needed to leave the kiddie pool. But the universe has curious ways of balancing things. And the balance was approaching. That boy was always strange, Aunt Rebecca commented, and she would know they'd barely spoken 3 sentences in 20 years. Very withdrawn, didn't mix with anyone. But the mother bears her share of guilt too, Uncle Richard ventured privately when she wasn't around. She always had a clear favorite. Everyone saw it, they just didn't want to acknowledge it. Family is family, the grandmother pontificated, with the hollow wisdom elderly people often use to avoid taking sides. Blood always calls. He'll come back, and when he does, she'll forgive. That's how it works. But forgiveness presupposes regret, and regret presupposes acknowledgement of error, and acknowledgement of error presupposes humility. And humility was a scarce resource in that family dynamic. Social pressure began to build. At family gatherings, his name was avoided like a curse. His absence haunted them, a tangible void everyone felt but no one mentioned. There was an unspoken expectation that he would eventually appear, head bowed, asking forgiveness and seeking his place in the family again. Because that's how it worked. The prodigal son always returned remorseful. The mother always forgave. The family was always reunited. It was the script everyone knew, the comforting story they'd all heard. But this son was writing a different script. August arrived, and with it, news that no one expected. Cousin Claire, the one with the imported SUV, dropped the news casually during lunch. Did you know he's coming back? He'll be here for Grandma's birthday next month. The silence at the table was absolute. Who told you that? The mother asked, her attempt at indifference betrayed by the nervousness in her voice. He told me himself. Sent me a message last week. Said he wants to see the family. The mother absorbed this. Surprise, curiosity, and something else entirely, a glimmer of satisfaction. Finally came to his senses, she thought. He'll come crawling back. He'll admit he was wrong. He'll take his rightful place. But there was a peculiar detail in the message Claire had received. A detail she hadn't mentioned at first, but that had intrigued her. He'd said he would bring a gift. A special gift for the mother. Something that will change everything, he'd written. The news spread through the family like wildfire. He was coming back, and he was bringing a gift. Did he win the lottery? So Aunt Rebecca speculated. Maybe he got a good job and wants to share it, Uncle Richard ventured. It doesn't matter what he brings, the mother declared with rehearsed authority. If he comes with true humility, that's enough. Family can't be bought with gifts. The irony of her statement went completely unnoticed by her. The following weeks were tense. The mother alternated between public disdain, I don't even care about this, and private curiosity, compulsively checking her phone, waiting for a message from him. What could he bring? Money? Unlikely. He'd never had much. Some expensive object? But with what resources? An elaborate apology? probable, but he had specifically mentioned a gift. Curiosity was an itch she couldn't stop scratching. And then came the week of grandmother's birthday. The entire family would gather. Uncles, cousins, nephews. It would be the perfect stage. Guaranteed audience. Witnesses to his eventual triumphant reconciliation. To his return to the status of magnanimous mother who forgives her ungrateful son. She even bought a new dress for the occasion. She wanted to be impeccable for the moment. On Friday afternoon, the day before the party, he called. Mom. His voice was different, firmer, more mature. Without the hesitation from before. I'll arrive tomorrow at 3. I have something for you. That's good, son. Good that you've finally come to your senses. Silence on the line. And then, see you tomorrow. He hung up before she could say anything else. That night, while the house slept, he reviewed his plans one last time. The gift was ready, wrapped, waiting for the right moment. It wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't a car or apartment or anything that could be converted into monetary value. It was something much more valuable and much more devastating. It was the truth. Packaged in a form she couldn't ignore, distort, or reinterpret. A truth that would expose before the entire family what really mattered to her. A truth that would reveal the exact nature of her generosity and her maternal love. He smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found peace in doing the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon, everything would change. The gift he would bring wouldn't just destroy the fantasy she had built about herself. It would destroy the fantasy that the entire family had agreed to maintain. And sometimes the truth is the cruelest gift someone can receive. Especially when that truth comes wrapped with a perfect bow, delivered with unwavering calm, before witnesses who cannot deny what they saw. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. The moment of revelation was coming, and the tension in the house was suffocating. It was Christmas again. 3 years after that Christmas. The Christmas when he received nothing. The Christmas when the mother looked directly into his eyes and said, "You don't deserve anything." But now everything was different. The family was gathered. Cousins, uncles, grandparents. The main table was set with an expensive red tablecloth, porcelain plates that the mother only brought out on special occasions, and a golden centerpiece that she had bought weeks ago. Everything perfect, everything controlled, exactly the way she liked it. The guests were talking animatedly. Uncle Mark was laughing loudly, telling some joke. Cousin Jennifer was enthusiastically sharing baby photos on her phone. Grandmother was sitting in her usual armchair, observing everything with that tired gaze of someone who had seen this scene repeat itself dozens of times. And in the center of it all, as always, was her. The matriarch, the queen of the kingdom. The woman who decided who deserved love and who deserved indifference. The mother. She was wearing a dark green dress, perfectly fitted, with a pearl necklace that glowed under the chandelier light. Her hair was impeccable, her makeup subtle but present. She smiled, she greeted. She asked about everyone's lives with that superficial interest that seemed genuine, but never was. And then the doorbell rang. The conversation didn't stop. No one seemed to pay much attention. After all, there were still more people to arrive. But the mother stopped. For a fraction of a second, something crossed her face. Something she tried to quickly hide behind her rehearsed smile. But it was too late. He had seen it. "I'll get it," said the younger sister, standing up from the couch. The mother nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the door. As if she knew. As if somehow she had already guessed who was on the other side. The door opened, and there he was. The room didn't fall silent immediately. The conversations continued for a few more seconds. But one by one, the voices faded. The heads turned. The gazes converged. Because the person who entered through the door wasn't the thin, ashamed boy they remembered. He wasn't the neglected son who had left that house 3 years ago with an old backpack on his back and a broken heart. No. He was a man. He was wearing a dark gray suit, perfectly cut, that highlighted every line of his body. The posture was upright, confident. He didn't enter hesitantly, looking at the ground as he used to do. He entered with his head held high, his shoulders back, and a gaze. A gaze that said he knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, he knew what he was worth. "Hi, everyone," he said, voice calm and steady. Uncle Mark was the first to react. He stood up quickly, a broad smile on his face, and walked toward him. "Wow, man, look at you. You're different, huh? You're even taller." He smiled. A polite smile, but not effusive. "Hi, Uncle. Good to see you." The others began to approach. Cousin Jennifer, Cousin Andrew, all commenting on how well he looked, on how handsome he was, on how time had been generous. But he wasn't really listening, because his eyes, from the moment he walked in, had been fixed on one person. Her. His mother was standing near the table, holding a glass of wine, watching. She hadn't moved. She hadn't come to greet him, just watched and he watched back. For long seconds, they stared at each other. The room continued bustling around them, but between the two of them, there was a heavy silence. A silence that carried years of hurt, of rejection, of words left unsaid. And then finally she spoke. "You came." Her voice was flat, neither cold nor warm, just neutral. "I did," he replied, keeping his tone equally neutral. She took a sip of wine, eyes still fixed on him. "I didn't know you would show up. You invited me. I invited the whole family. I didn't expect everyone would come." The phrase was a jab, subtle but sharp. A reminder that he had never been a priority, that his presence was optional. But he didn't take the bait, didn't react. He just nodded slightly, as if he had understood the message perfectly and chosen to ignore it. And that annoyed her. He saw it. The way her fingers gripped the glass a little more tightly. The way her jaw tensed for a second before relaxing again. She wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to not having control. "Well," she said, turning slightly toward the room, "since you're here, make yourself comfortable. Make yourself comfortable," as if he were a guest. As if he hadn't grown up in this very house. As if he hadn't spent years desperately trying to be seen, to be loved, to be enough for her. But he said nothing. He just nodded again and walked into the living room, greeting the other family members with polite but distant cordiality. His older brother was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. When he saw his younger brother enter, he briefly looked up, gave a quick wave, and went back to his screen. No hug, no "I've missed you, man." Nothing. And the younger one noticed. Of course he noticed. But again, he didn't react. He just sat down in an empty chair, accepted a glass of water that his aunt offered, and sat there, observing. Cousin Jennifer approached, smiling. "Man, you look amazing. What have you been up to? What are you working on?" He smiled back. "I have my own business, consulting." "Consulting?" She seemed impressed. "How fancy. Is it going well?" "It's going really well." It wasn't a lie. After he left home, he had worked like crazy. 2 jobs, studying at night, saving every penny. And little by little, he had built something. Something real, something his own. And now, 3 years later, he was no longer that broken boy begging for scraps of affection. He was someone. He had value. And he knew it. His mother watched from a distance. He could feel her gaze on him. Even when he wasn't looking directly at her, she was analyzing, trying to understand, trying to figure out what had changed. And he let her wonder. Dinner was served. The table was laden with roasted turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, salads, and desserts. Everything perfect. Everything excessive. As always, they sat down. The mother, as usual, at the head of the table. The older brother to her right. And him! He was seated almost at the end of the table. Far away, as always. But this time, he didn't care. Actually, he almost smiled. During dinner, the conversation flowed. Uncle Mark told stories. Grandma complained that the food was too salty. The older brother talked about the new car their mother had bought for him last month. "It's an imported model," he said, excited. "Leather seats, sunroof, Bose sound system. Mom really nailed the gift." The mother smiled, proud. "You deserve it, son. You work so hard." The younger one nearly choked on his water. The older brother had never worked a day in his life. He lived for free in their mother's house. He drove cars she paid for. He lived on an allowance. But he deserved it, of course. The meal continued. And then, after dessert, the mother tapped lightly on her glass with a spoon, getting everyone's attention. "Well, since we're all here," she began, a broad smile on her face, "I think it's time for the gift exchange." The room came alive. The children ran toward the tree. The adults stood up, picking up the gifts they had brought, and the younger one stayed seated. Quiet. Watching. The mother began distributing the gifts: an expensive watch for the older brother, a jewelry set for Cousin Jennifer, a bottle of imported whiskey for Uncle Mark. She gave each gift with pomp, with smiles, with warm words. Then she looked at the younger one. "And for you," she said, picking up a small box wrapped in gold paper. "I brought this." She extended the box. He looked at her. Not at the box, at her. And slowly he stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone watching. He walked to his mother, took the small box, opened it. Inside were a pair of cufflinks, simple, cheap, the kind you buy at any department store. He looked at them, then at his mother, and then, without saying a word, he closed the box. "Thank you," he said, voice neutral. The mother seemed satisfied, as if she had fulfilled her role as a generous mother. "Y mercado." And then he spoke. "I also brought a gift. For you." The entire room turned to him. The mother blinked, surprised. "For me?" "Yes." He walked to the bag he had left near the door when he came in. He grabbed a box. It wasn't big. It wasn't flashy, but it was wrapped with care. Black paper, silver ribbon. He turned back and handed the box to her. The mother's eyes fixed on the box, then shifted to him. There was curiosity in her gaze, and perhaps something else, a flicker of greed, because gifts, especially expensive ones, had always captivated her. She picked up the box, weighed it in her hand, smiled slightly. "What is it?" she asked, with that tone of false modesty. "Open it," he said simply. The entire room was watching now, all eyes fixed on the mother and the gift. She began to open it, slowly, savoring the attention, and when she finally removed the paper, it revealed a simple box. Wooden, nothing written on it. She frowned but continued, opened the box, and stopped. Her expression shifted. Curiosity faded, replaced by confusion. Then something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. She stared into the box for long seconds, motionless, silent. Then slowly she looked up at her son. What is this?" Her voice was low, tense. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her. Calm. Firm. And then, with a clear and deliberate voice, he said, "It's what you really deserve, Mother." The silence that followed was absolute. The mother's gaze dropped back to the box. Her hands trembled, a small gesture she tried to conceal, but he noticed. The entire room was confused. Uncle Mark leaned forward, trying to see what was inside the box. Cousin Jennifer whispered something to her husband. The older brother stood up from the couch, frowning. "Mom, what is it?" he asked, but the mother didn't respond. She simply stared into the box, processing, understanding, deciding how to react all at once. And the youngest son remained perfectly still, simply watching. Because this was the moment, the one he'd planned, the one he'd waited 3 long years for, the moment when everything would finally be revealed. The mother snapped the box shut. The sound reverberated through the room. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something entirely unfamiliar in her eyes. Fear. Not anger. Not contempt. Fear. "Everyone," she said, her voice tense yet controlled. "Could you give us a moment?" The family hesitated. Everyone wanted to know what was happening, but her authority held firm. Slowly, reluctantly, they rose and left the room, surrendering their curiosity for the moment, until only the two remained, mother and son, their eyes locked. And then, her voice low and trembling, she asked, "How did you know?" He didn't answer, because the question was the confession itself. Now the true confrontation would begin. The silence was absolute, that kind of silence that follows a revelation so shocking that no one knows what to say. The box remained in the mother's hands, and what lay inside carried the weight of a detonation. She looked at the box, then at her son, then back at the box. Her fingers trembled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she seemed genuinely speechless. What is this?" Her voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. He didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there with the unsettling calm of someone who held all the cards. His eyes scanned the room, aunts and uncles paralyzed, the younger brother bewildered, the grandmother suspended mid-sip, her cup frozen in the air. And then he spoke. "This, Mother," he said, gesturing to the box, "contains a complete record. Every donation I've made for the last 3 years, children's hospitals, homeless shelters, charities for struggling families. It's all documented. Dates, amounts, receipts." She blinked, once, twice, as if processing was impossible. "You're giving me receipts as a Christmas gift?" "No." He shook his head slowly. "I'm showing you where the money went. Money you claimed I was throwing away. Money you said I couldn't manage. Money that, in your view, should have been used to make something of myself." Aunt Martha, who was sitting on the left, let out a small sigh. Aunt Barbara leaned forward, eyes wide, clearly wanting to hear every word. The mother opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't understand what you're... Let me spell it out." He stepped forward, not aggressively, but with intent. "You always said I was selfish, self-absorbed, useless, a disappointment." Each word landed precisely, a catalog of accusations he'd carried for years. "But the truth," he continued, "is that while you accumulated possessions, judging people by their wealth, their gifts, the size of their houses, I was across the city helping families without a roof over their heads." Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably but held his gaze. "I've donated more money to charity in the last 3 years than you've spent on all these expensive decorations and extravagant dinners to impress people you don't even really like." It was like he'd thrown a bucket of ice water over the entire room, because it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them, about the values their family had built, about misplaced priorities, about the superficiality they had all, in some way, normalized. And the mother? She was beginning to tremble. Not out of anger yet, but from something deeper. Shame? Shock? Perhaps both. "You..." She looked at the envelope again, as if it were a strange object she didn't know how to hold. "Are you doing this to humiliate me? Is that it? You came back here just to embarrass me in front of everyone? No, Mom. His voice softened but remained firm. I came back because I still hoped you could see that there's something more important than money. More important than appearances. More important than impressing strangers. He paused, took a deep breath. I came back because despite everything, I still love you. And I wanted to give you the chance to realize how much you've lost by valuing things instead of people. And it was at that moment, exactly at the 44-minute mark of this surreal family reunion, that something happened. The grandmother set her cup down on the table with a sharp clink. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane. All eyes turned toward her. He's right. Her voice was weak but firm. God forgive me, but he's completely right. The mother turned to her own mother, mouth agape. Mom, you can't be serious. I am very serious. The grandmother stepped toward her daughter. I raised you better than this. I taught you that family comes first. That love isn't measured in money. That generosity isn't about how much you spend, but about how much you give. She pointed to her son, the grandson who had been rejected. And this boy here, he learned these lessons. Not from you, but in spite of you. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Aunt Barbara covered her mouth with her hand. Uncle Richard looked at the floor. And the younger brother, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I knew. His voice was low, ashamed. I knew he was donating to charity. He told me once. And I didn't say anything because I thought that. I thought it wasn't important. Everyone looked at him now. The favorite brother. The son who had always received the best room, the best gifts, the best attention. But I was wrong. He looked directly at his older brother. Wrong not to defend you. Wrong to accept everything in silence. Wrong to be complicit in all of this. The older son blinked, surprised. He clearly hadn't expected this. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the silence. I was complicit too. Aunt Martha raised her hand as if issuing a confession. How many times did I stay silent when you, sister, spoke badly of him? How many times did I look away from the difference in treatment? How many times did I prioritize keeping the peace over doing what was right? Her words were like a dam breaking. And once she started, others followed. I did too, Uncle Richard said, his voice grave. I always thought it was strange. I always felt something was wrong, but I never spoke up. I judged him, Aunt Barbara admitted, tears streaming down her face. I believed everything you said, sister. I believed he was irresponsible, lazy, no good. And I never bothered to question whether any of it was true. One by one, they confessed, admitted, awakened. And the mother? She stood at the center of it all, clutching that envelope, completely isolated by the greed she'd cultivated over the years. Because this was the truth that was becoming painfully clear. Greed doesn't isolate you just financially. It isolates you emotionally, socially, morally. She had spent years building a fortress of appearances, judgment, and distorted values. And now, with a single revelation, it was crumbling. And no one was rushing to save it. Are you turning against me? Her voice trembled, a strange mixture of indignation and vulnerability. Because of him? After everything I've done for this family? It's not about turning against you, Mom, the son said, his voice heavy with sadness. It's about recognizing the truth. It's about stopping pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about finally being honest. She looked around the room, at her own mother, eyes filled with disappointment, at her younger son, unable to meet her gaze, at her siblings and in-laws, all bearing expressions that ranged from embarrassment to second-hand shame. And for the first time, perhaps in her entire life, she realized she was alone. Not physically. The room was full of people. But emotionally, she was completely devastatingly alone. Because the truth is simple. No one defends greed when exposed to the light. No one stands by someone who values things over people. No one applauds selfishness dressed as pragmatism. Her fingers went slack around the envelope. It slipped to the floor, papers scattering at her feet. Donation receipts, proofs of generosity. Concrete evidence that the son she had rejected was, in fact, everything she pretended to be and never was. Her voice broke. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the armor of pride she had worn for so long. I didn't know. I didn't. I thought that. The words died in her throat, because what could she say? I thought you were a failure. Doesn't sound better when the person proves otherwise. I thought money was everything. Isn't a defense. It's an admission. The son looked at her. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something that hurt even more. Compassion. I didn't come here to destroy you, Mom, he said softly. I came here to show you that there's still time. Time to change. Time to choose differently. Time to realize that the love you've searched for in things was always in people. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each family member. It's not too late for any of us. It's not too late to choose character over wallet, generosity over greed, people over possessions. And then he began to turn toward the door. Wait! His mother's voice was so low it was barely audible. Are you leaving again? He stopped, turned his head slightly but didn't turn around completely. I'm not leaving, Mom. I never left. You pushed me out. He paused. But the door is always open, on my end. When you decide to value the son I am, instead of the son you wanted me to be. I'll be here. Silence. And then he left. He didn't slam the door, didn't make a scene, just left. With the dignity of someone who had spoken their truth and didn't need external validation to know they were right. The room fell silent for long seconds. Nobody knew what to say, what to do, how to process it all. The mother stood there, in the middle of the room, surrounded by donation papers scattered at her feet, surrounded by a family that now saw her with different eyes. The grandmother was the first to move. She walked slowly to her daughter, placed her hand on her shoulder, and said something deceptively simple, yet utterly devastating. You lost the greatest gift you ever had. And it wasn't any of these objects you value so much. It was him. And with that, she too left the room, leaving her daughter alone with the weight of her own choices. One by one, the others began to get up. Not in a hurry, but not staying either. Aunt Barbara gave an uncomfortable pat on her sister's shoulder before leaving. Uncle Richard just nodded and walked away. The younger brother hesitated longer, clearly torn between loyalty to his mother and the truth he had just witnessed. But in the end, he too left. Because sometimes, silence is the most honest answer we can give. The mother was left alone in the dining room. The lights of the Christmas tree still blinked cheerfully, completely oblivious to the emotional devastation that had just taken place. The expensive gifts were still under the tree, perfectly wrapped, perfectly useless. She looked down, at the papers scattered, at the receipts from children's hospitals, at the donations to shelters, at the documented generosity of a son she had called selfish. And slowly, very slowly, she knelt down. She picked up one of the papers. Read it. Picked up another. Read that too. Each receipt cut like a blade. Each donation was proof. Each act of documented kindness indicted her distorted values. Her hands began to tremble for real now. Not with anger, not with indignation, but with something much deeper, something she had avoided feeling for years. Shame. True shame. Not the superficial kind of being caught in a social lie, but the kind that cuts to the bone, the kind that forces you to question who you've become and how you got here. And there, alone in that lavish dining room, surrounded by expensive decorations and material gifts, she finally understood what the son had been trying to show. She had lost. Not the argument, not the discussion, but something infinitely more valuable. She had lost the chance to know who her son really was. She had lost years of genuine relationship. She had lost the opportunity to be part of the kindness he spread throughout the world. She had lost everything that really mattered, because she was too busy counting what didn't matter. And now she was alone with this truth. A truth that no amount of money, no expensive gift, no big house could mask. Outside, the son got into his car. His hands trembled as he gripped the keys, not from nervousness, but from the weight of finally speaking the truth after so long. He had exposed the truth, not for revenge, not for cruelty, but because sometimes the truth is the only thing that can shatter destructive cycles and force necessary change. He started the car. The street was dark, only the Christmas lights from neighboring houses illuminating the path. And as he drove, a question echoed in his mind. What comes next? He had done his part. He had shown the truth. He had given his mother and family the opportunity to see. But what would they do with this truth? Would they ignore it and fall back into old patterns? Would they defend themselves and make excuses? Or would they finally change? He didn't know. And in a way, it was no longer in his hands. He had planted the seed. Now it was up to them to decide whether they would water it or let it die. And as the car disappeared into the night, the house was left behind. Silent. Heavy. Burdened with the weight of truths finally spoken and choices that still needed to be made. The question was no longer whether the mother had been exposed. She had. The question now was, what was she going to do with that exposure? Would she defend herself until the end, protecting her ego and losing everything truly valuable? Or would she have the courage to look in the mirror, admit her mistakes, and try to rebuild what she had broken? That answer, only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Nothing would be as it was before. Greed had been exposed. Character had been revealed. And the family had witnessed it all. And in the end, justice didn't come with screams or violence. It came with something far more powerful. The truth. Simple. Devastating. Undeniable. In the weeks that followed that transformative night, two lives began to walk radically different paths. like two rivers born from the same source, destined for opposite seas. Mother and son moved through realities that, although they shared the same physical world, inhabited completely distinct moral universes. The mother remained in her large house, surrounded by the same luxurious furniture, the same velvet curtains, the same objects she had always accumulated as trophies of a successful life. But something had changed in the texture of that space. The silence that filled the rooms now had a different weight. It was no longer the comfortable silence of unquestioned authority, but something denser, heavier, almost suffocating. The first weeks brought small cracks in her carefully constructed routine. The neighbor who used to visit her for afternoon coffee canceled with a vague excuse about family commitments. The sister-in-law who always praised her good taste began responding to her messages with increasing delay, responses that grew shorter until they stopped coming altogether. At first, she dismissed these signs as temporary coincidences. People get busy, families have their own dramas, life follows its natural course. But when it came time for her grandson's birthday, the son of one of her other children, and she realized the party would happen without her even being told where it was, reality began seeping through the cracks of her denial. The family gathering the following month was particularly revealing. She arrived as she always did, expecting eyes to turn toward her, expecting the environment to reorganize itself around her presence. But the greetings were polite and distant, as if she were a formal guest rather than the matriarch of the family. Conversations flowed around her without truly including her, like water flowing around a stone in the middle of a river. Her favorite daughter, the one who had always stood by her side, showed signs of discomfort that hadn't existed before. She still sat close to her mother, still defended her choices when someone dared to question them subtly. But there was new tension in her shoulders, a way her eyes avoided prolonged contact, as if bearing that loyalty had become a visible weight. During dinner, when someone casually mentioned the name of the son she had driven away, "I heard he got that huge promotion, did you know?" The entire table filled with tense silence. But it wasn't the silence of someone who fears displeasing the matriarch. It was something different. It was the silence of someone who knows exactly what happened and consciously chooses not to validate the official version of events. She tried to change the subject with her usual authority, but her voice sounded strangely weak in that space. And for the first time in decades, she realized that her word no longer had the power to end conversations, to define truths, to shape family reality according to her will. Material wealth remained untouched. Her bank account was still robust. Her investments yielded as always. Her house maintained the same market value. But there was a poverty growing at the edges of her life. The poverty of purpose, of true connection, of being seen as anything more than a figure that inspires obligation or caution. On a particularly silent afternoon, sitting alone in her perfectly decorated living room, she looked around and had a thought she immediately tried to suppress. All of that, the expensive furniture, the imported curtains, the rare objects, were just things. And things don't fill space the way people do. They don't look back when you seek validation. They don't respond when you're trying to justify your choices. They don't warm a room with genuine laughter or conversations beyond polite formalities. But recognizing that emptiness would require admitting she had made wrong choices, and she had built an entire life on the foundation that her choices were always, unquestionably, correct. So she pushed the thought away, just as she had pushed so many other discomforts over the years, and turned on the television to fill the silence with voices that didn't expect her to respond. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a life that she had tried to control and ended up liberating, her son was flourishing in ways that surprised even him. The promotion he had achieved at work was not accidental. Free from the emotional weight of trying to win impossible approval, he had channeled that energy into his own development. The nights he used to spend anxious, replaying family conversations and wondering what he had done wrong, were now dedicated to courses, readings, projects that genuinely interested him. His colleagues noticed the change. There was a new lightness in his presence, a confidence that wasn't rooted in arrogance, but in someone who had finally stopped measuring himself by other people's standards. When his boss offered him the leadership of a new department, a position he never would have thought himself capable of occupying 6 months before, he accepted, without the voice of self-sabotage that used to paralyze his ambitions. But the deepest transformation was happening in the realm of relationships. For the first time in his adult life, he allowed people to truly know him. Not the edited version, carefully constructed to avoid judgment. Not the perpetually desperate son seeking approval, measuring every word so as not to disappoint. Just him, with his wounds, his small victories, his terrible jokes, his genuine passions. He found his chosen family in the most unexpected places. The work colleague who became his confidant, sharing stories of her own family battles over iced tea after long shifts. The volunteer group he started attending on Saturday mornings, where he discovered that helping others facing family rejection was also a way to heal his own wounds. The elderly neighbor who invited him to dinner and treated him with the kind of genuine interest he had always craved from his own mother. There was a woman too, someone who appeared in his life without the dramatic fanfare of romantic movies, but with the quiet inevitability of something that simply made sense. She knew him already free, already whole in his imperfection, and didn't try to fix him or mold him. She just saw him, and being seen, truly seen and still accepted, was an experience so profound that sometimes he needed to stop in the middle of ordinary conversations and breathe deeply to process the vastness of that simple gift. On a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after that transformative night, he was in a park helping organize a pet adoption fair for the local shelter. Sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Children laughed as they fed the puppies. Volunteers talked animatedly while setting up the tents. And in the midst of all that movement, arranging a sign about adoption inquiries, he had a revelation so simple and so profound that he needed to stop what he was doing. He was happy. Not the conditional happiness of when things went well. Not the performative happiness he displayed to convince himself that everything was fine, but a quiet happiness, rooted, that came from knowing who he was and liking that person. In that moment, he thought of his mother. Not with the anger that consumed him before. Not with the desperate desire for recognition that paralyzed him. Just with a gentle sadness, the kind we feel for people who chose cages when the doors were open. And then the thought passed, like a cloud crossing the sky. And he returned to work, to the laughter of the volunteers around him, to the life he was building with his own hands. Back in the broader family scene, family members made their own choices about how to process what they had witnessed that night of confrontation. Some, especially the younger ones, began to question narratives they had accepted without reflection before. If the matriarch could be so wrong about the character of a son, what else could be distorted in the family stories they took as absolute truth? One of the brothers, the one who had remained in uncomfortable silence during that fateful dinner, eventually called. The conversation was hesitant at first. Decades of family dysfunction don't unravel overnight, but there was recognition in that call. An unspoken apology that came through the simple choice to dial the number, to build the bridge. I knew it was wrong, he admitted in a confession that had cost years of accumulated courage. But it was easier to go along with her than to face the storm. That makes me a coward, I know. It makes you human, replied the son, who intimately knew the weight of disappointing the matriarch. And it makes you brave now. That's what matters. The mother's favorite daughter took longer. She had invested so much in being the perfect daughter and maintaining loyalty to her mother as the central pillar of her identity, that questioning that foundation seemed to threaten the entire structure of who she was. But the cracks were appearing. When her own son asked why his uncle no longer came to family parties, she couldn't formulate an answer that made moral sense when spoken aloud to a child. Grandma and he had a disagreement sounded hollow. He disappointed the family, was obviously false when everyone knew his only transgression was being unable to afford expensive gifts. It was her husband, in a careful conversation one night after putting the children to bed, who finally verbalized what she had been avoiding. You don't need to choose between your mother and your brother, but you do need to choose what kind of person you want to be. What kind of example you want to set for our children about loyalty, about justice, about love. Her final choice was still to come, but for the first time, she considered that perhaps there was a choice to be made. That blind loyalty was not virtue when it served injustice. And so, the family ecosystem reorganized itself. Not dramatically, like the collapse in films, but slowly, gradually. Like tectonic plates moving millimeters per day, until one day you realize that the entire landscape has changed. The matriarch who once ruled with an iron fist now found herself in a kind of voluntary exile, surrounded by material wealth yet distant from the relational richness that truly sustains a life. The son she had expelled for not being able to demonstrate love through expensive gifts was discovering that the true gift of that night hadn't been the survival kit he had brought to provoke consciousness. The true gift had been his own liberation. The freedom to stop bending in search of approval that would never come. The permission to build a life based on his own values, not on others' expectations shaped by empty materialism. The deep recognition that his worth as a person did not depend on bank accounts, expensive gifts, or validation from someone who had chosen to see value only in what could be priced. And this freedom, he discovered day after day, was worth more than any luxurious gift he could ever receive. And so, as the old stories tell when they want to transmit wisdom across generations, it was learned that not all that glitters is gold, nourishes the spirit. The mother who traded connection for possession discovered that big houses become terribly empty when filled only with things. Authority not grounded in genuine respect is just borrowed power, always one step away from being revoked when people finally find the courage to say no. The son who refused to measure his worth by others' distorted standards discovered something no material wealth could ever buy: the peace that comes from looking in the mirror and recognizing who looks back. The knowledge that the people in his life are there because they choose to be, not because family obligation keeps them chained. The story reminds us, as the best stories always do, of a truth our ancestors knew well. Character survives when gold dissolves. Self-dignity weighs more than approval bought with submission. And sometimes, the greatest act of love we can perform, for ourselves and paradoxically for others, is to refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish us. The survival kit he had brought that Christmas night now held a symbolic place in his memory. It was no longer about the object itself, those cereal bars and water bottles. It was about what that gesture represented. The moment when he stopped pretending that crumbs were feasts. The moment when he chose dignity over desperation. 2 years after that transformative night, on an ordinary spring afternoon with nothing special about it except that it was perfectly ordinary, he sat on his small balcony reading a book. Not a luxurious balcony overlooking elaborate gardens, just a simple space with potted plants he tended himself, a comfortable chair he'd bought on clearance, a cup of coffee that cooled forgotten beside him as he lost himself in the pages. The woman who now shared his life came out with 2 plates of sliced fruit, sitting in the chair next to his without needing to say anything, just existing in the same space, comfortable in a silence that didn't need to be filled with performances or proofs of affection. The phone rang. One of the brothers inviting him to the weekend barbecue, casually mentioning there would be a soccer game afterward and asking if he could bring that famous sauce he'd made at the last gathering. Simple conversations, natural inclusion, family redefined. When he hung up the phone and turned his gaze back to the balcony, to the woman beside him reading her own magazine, to the plants that flourished because he tended them with consistency and care, to the absolutely ordinary and extraordinarily his own life that he had built, he felt that rooted happiness once again. And for the first time in his entire life, he realized he no longer thought about his mother's approval. Not as something he sought, not as something whose absence hurt. He simply didn't think about it. She had become irrelevant to his happiness, not in a vengeful or bitter way, but in the most liberating way possible, with peaceful indifference. The true victory was not proving his worth to her. It was stopping needing to prove it. This, then, is the wisdom that the story offers to those who have ears to hear. You do not owe loyalty to those who treat your heart as negotiable merchandise. You do not owe apologies for setting boundaries that protect your dignity. You do not owe elaborate explanations for why you refuse to accept crumbs when you deserve a place at the table. And perhaps most importantly, you don't need to wait for those who hurt you to recognize the damage before you begin your healing. The validation you seek won't come from them. It will come from yourself, in the sacred moment when you decide that you are already enough exactly as you are. There is strength in walking away from battles that can only be won at the cost of your own soul. There is courage in choosing peace over justice. There is deep wisdom in recognizing that some people, no matter how much we love them, no matter what blood we share, simply don't have the capacity to give us what we need, and that's okay. We can love them from a distance while building full lives far from their toxic reach. The son in this story did not wait for his mother to change. He did not waste years trying to fix her, explain himself better, be more perfect until finally deserving her love. He simply left. And in that departure, he found entry into a life he never would have known was possible, while he remained twisted by the need to earn approval from all the wrong people. So this story ends not with forced reconciliation or satisfying revenge. It ends with something rarer and far more valuable: genuine liberation. And if you who listen to this story recognize fragments of your own life in it, if you see reflections of relationships where your worth is constantly questioned, where love comes with impossible conditions, where you contort yourself trying to be enough for people who chose to see insufficiency, then let this story be your sign. You deserve more than emotional crumbs. You deserve to be seen, valued, and loved without earning or performing for that love. And if those who should offer it freely refuse to do so, you have permission, sacred, absolute permission, to build family among those who recognize your worth without you having to constantly prove it. The most precious gift you can give yourself does not come in luxurious packaging. It comes in the silent moment when you choose your own peace over the approval of others. In the moment when you finally, gloriously, stop diminishing yourself to fit into spaces far too small for your soul. And in that moment, that sacred moment of choice over toxic obligation, you discover what the sun in this story discovered. That freedom does not need external validation. That you are always enough. And that the life you deserve to live was waiting patiently on the other side of the courage to walk away from what diminished you. This is the wisdom. This is the gift. This is the end of the story. And perhaps, if you allow it, it is also the beginning of yours.